An early morning raid on a Chicago apartment building Tuesday has local leaders vowing they'll continue to fight back against the Trump administration.
America, Chicago's far-left politicians are having a complete meltdown because federal agents did something radical. They're actually enforcing immigration law. Mayor Brandon Johnson is crying about militarized forces, while Governor J.B. Pritzker is demanding the Fed stop protecting citizens from Venezuelan gang members. Meanwhile, ICE just pulled nearly 40 criminals out of one apartment complex, including Tren de Aragua members who were squatting in vacant units with weapons.
Many Chicagoans were shocked and appalled to see videos of heavily armed, masked federal agents in our streets yesterday. The reality is that this stunt has nothing to do with public safety. This is about politics, money, and power.
What is up, guys? Tyson here. Thank you so much for rocking with me. This is exactly what we voted for. Real immigration enforcement that puts American citizens first. But these sanctuary city politicians are more upset about ICE doing their job than about Venezuelan gang members terrorizing Chicago neighborhoods. Let me break down Mayor Brandon Johnson, Mayor Mohawk's press conference, because it is a masterclass of deflection and victimhood. This guy is more outraged about federal agents wearing masks for their own protection than he is about criminals that they're arresting. Johnson claims this is about politics, money, and power. But let's talk about what's really happening here. ICE agents are removing violent criminals from Chicago streets, while Johnson spends his time protecting the people who shouldn't even be here in the first place.
He wants to militarize our cities, whether that's through ICE or through the National Guard or the United States Army or armed forces. He wants to provoke conflict so that he can use this as a pretext to send even more federal agents into our city.
The mayor is literally complaining that Trump wants to use federal resources to protect American citizens. That's called governing, Brandon. That's what presidents are supposed to do when local leadership fails their own people. And notice how he frames this. Trump wants to provoke conflict. No, Brandon, no, Mayor Mohawk. The conflict already exists. It's called crime. It's been destroying Chicago neighborhoods while you've been too busy virtue signaling. Governor J.B. Pritzker is just as delusional as his mayor. He's demanding that the Department of Homeland Security stop requesting military personnel to Illinois. Think about that for a second. The governor of a state is literally telling federal authorities they can't protect his own citizens from criminal gangs.
Yeah, well, Governor Pritzker and other elected leaders believe the ramped up immigration enforcement is meant to intimidate. This comes as just overnight there was dozens of federal agents surrounding an apartment building.
Pritzker thinks immigration enforcement is meant to intimidate. Good. It should intimidate criminals. That is the whole point. When you're a member of a Venezuelan gang squatting in American apartment buildings with weapons, you should be intimidated by law enforcement. But here's what really exposes these politicians. They're more concerned about the optics of federal agents doing their job than they are about Venezuelan gang members who are living in apartment complexes with weapons terrorizing residents. The governor says this deployment is illegal and it threatens legal challenges. Let me get this straight. Enforcing immigration law is illegal, but harboring criminal gang members in sanctuary cities is perfectly fine. This is the backwards logic of sanctuary state policies. Now let's talk about what actually happened during this raid, because the results speak for themselves. Federal agents surrounded an apartment complex in Chicago's South Side and arrested nearly 40 people, including confirmed Tren de Aragua gang members.
That was a known empty apartment complex that the city knew of, that it was known TDA members were in that building. We knew there were going to be weapons in that location. There were people living in squatting in vacant apartments.
This wasn't some random immigration sweep. This was a targeted operation against a known criminal organization that was squatting in vacant apartments with weapons. The city knew TDA members were in the building. They knew that they had weapons, and they did nothing about it.
Hundreds of federal agents surrounded this apartment on the south of Chicago early Tuesday morning. Officers flooded into the building on foot. Others landed on the top of the complex by a helicopter.
The operation required hundreds of federal agents, helicopters, and coordinated raids because these weren't just undocumented workers. These were armed gang members from one of South America's most violent criminal organizations. Among those arrested were a child blank offender, a burglar, a confirmed TDA member. But according to Mayor Brandon Johnson, Mayor Mohawk, this operation was just a stunt that has nothing to do with public safety. Really, Brandon? Really? Let's hear from the people who actually live in these neighborhoods because their perspective is very different from the politicians claiming to represent them.
I spoke to one woman who actually lives in this building, and she said she was detained by ICE agents overnight, and she says they took everyone and then asked questions later.
They just treated us like we were nothing.
Now, I understand that innocent residents got caught up in this operation, and that's unfortunate. But let's put this into context. Federal agents were conducting a raid on a building known to house armed gang members. In that situation, everybody gets detained until agents can sort out who's who.
Patricia Fisher says she came out to the hallway of her apartment complex on the corner of 75th and South Shore Drive in her nightgown around 10 Monday night, only to find ICE agents yelling police.
It was scary because I've never had a gun put in my face.
This resident describes being scared, and I get that. But here's what politicians won't tell you. She was living in a building with armed Venezuelan gang members. The reason she had guns pointed at her wasn't because ICE agents are being too aggressive. It was because she was living in a building that had become a criminal stronghold.
They was terrified. The kids was crying. People was screaming. They looked very distraught. I was out there crying when I seen the little girl come around the corner. Because they was bringing the kids out too. Had them zip tied to each other.
The images of children being zip tied are disturbing. No one wants to see that. But let's be honest about what really happened here. Because criminal gang members were using this building as a base of operations, putting everybody in danger, including those children. Now let's get to my favorite part of this story, because a quote-unquote alderperson got briefly detained during the operation. And yes, I said alderperson because apparently in Chicago, we can't say alderman anymore, especially in a situation like this. God forbid we use gender language when describing elected officials who enable criminal gang operation.
I'm gonna arrest you for that.
Video from the Citizen app shows alderperson Jesse Fuentes put in handcuffs after asking federal agents multiple times if there was a warrant for an undocumented man inside Humboldt Park Hospital.
The video shows federal agents briefly detaining this quote-unquote elder person. And of course, this becomes a major scandal. How dare federal agents treat an elected official like everyone else during a criminal investigation? But here's what's really happening here. This elder person represents the district where TDA gang members were squatting in apartment buildings with weapons. Instead of being outraged that federal agents had to clean up your district, they're outraged that they got treated like everybody else. This perfectly encapsulates the problem with Chicago's political class. They're more upset about being inconvenienced during a criminal investigation or interrupting a criminal investigation than they are about criminals operating in their own districts. The fact that this alderman got detained shows that federal agents aren't playing favorites. They're treating everybody equally under the law, which is exactly how it should be. But Mayor Brandon Johnson didn't stop at complaining about federal enforcement. He made specific corruption allegations against Tom Homan, claiming he accepted a $50,000 bribe from an undercover FBI agent. This is a serious accusation that deserves some scrutiny.
This comes on the heels of the revelation that was reported on MSNBC that Tom Homan, the so-called border czar, accepted a $50,000 bribe from undercover FBI agents in exchange for lucrative detention center contracts.
Johnson is calling for an independent investigator to review every ICE detention contract in Chicago, the country, and the state. And you know what? If there's actual evidence of corruption, investigate it. But also investigate the hundreds of millions of dollars Johnson's administration spent on migrant contracts during the Biden administration.
So let's call it what it is. Tom Homan sold out the American people for $50,000 in cash. And that's why I'm calling on the federal government to appoint an independent investigator to review every single contract in the city of Chicago.
Johnson claims 72% of the people in the ICE detention have no criminal record. That's misleading at best. If you're here illegally, you've already broken federal law. That is a criminal record, and those with additional charges, many are serious crimes, not just quote-unquote traffic violations like he's trying to claim. The mayor talks about private prison companies making money from detention centers. But where was this outrage when his administration was cutting no-bid contracts with migrant facility operators? Where was the concern concern about taxpayer money when Chicago spent $400 per night per migrant to house migrants in hotels. Let's talk about the actual results of federal immigration enforcement in Chicago, because the numbers tell a very different story than the politician rhetoric.
ICE even says that they've arrested well over 800 illegal immigrants since they launched Operation Midway Blitz back in early September.
Over 800 arrests since Operation Midway Blitz began. These aren't random sweeps. These are targeted operations against people who have committed crimes beyond just being here illegally. The federal response has been swift and decisive. Attorney General Pam Bondi is directing agents to protect ICE facilities after a weekend riots at the Broadview facility. When criminals attack federal agents, there's going to be some consequences.
U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi is directing agents to protect ICE facilities after a weekend of unrest in the Broadview ICE facility. Now, Attorney General Kwame Raoul says this deployment effort seems to be following the same pattern seen in Oregon, which is illegal.
The Trump administration allocated $170 million to ICE, more than all state and local police funding combined, because we have a massive problem that requires massive resources to fix. When you have millions and millions of people who entered the country illegally, when you have criminal networks like Tren de Aragua operating with impunity, you need serious federal intervention. This operation in Chicago perfectly illustrates the failures of sanctuary city policies. Local politicians create environments where criminal organizations can operate freely, then complain when federal authorities have to step in and protect citizens.
Although yesterday's protests were actually pretty peaceful, over the weekend riots outside a West Side Chicago ICE facility broke out. 5 people, Caroline, are now facing federal charges.
The pattern is always the same. Sanctuary policies enable criminal activity. Federal agents have to clean up the mess, and local politicians blame everyone except for themselves for the problems that they created. Johnson and J.B. Pritzker support policies that brought millions of illegal immigrants into this country. They welcomed them to Chicago with open arms, spent taxpayer money housing and feeding them. And now that there are consequences, now that federal agents are cleaning up the mess, they want to play victim. The business owners, the families, the law-abiding citizens of Chicago are suffering. Crime is through the roof, resources are stretched paper thin, and these politicians are more concerned about protecting people who broke federal law than protecting citizens who actually elected them.
The President of the United States falsely claims that Chicago is crime-ridden. It is not crime-ridden. We are not in the top 25 or 30 cities in the country, big cities in the country, for violent crime.
That's either delusional or deliberately misleading. Chicago has some of the highest murder rates in the country, and residents are fleeing the city because of crime and failed leadership. America, this Chicago operation shows exactly what happens when you have real federal leadership that's willing to enforce immigration law. Nearly 40 criminals removed from one building, including armed TDA gang members who were terrorizing residents. The politicians can cry about militarization all they want, but the results speak for themselves. When local leadership fails, when crime spirals out of control, when criminal gangs operate with impunity, federal intervention becomes necessary.
We will continue to stand united as a city, as a county, as a state, and local villages to reject any attempts to militarize our cities.
Mayor Johnson and Governor Pritzker can stand united in their opposition to law enforcement all they want, but the American people spoke loud and clear in November. We want our immigration laws enforced, we want criminal gang members removed, and we want politicians who put American citizens first. This is exactly why we need American first policies. This is exactly why we need leaders who will work with federal law enforcement, not against them. This is exactly why cities like Chicago will continue to fail until they elect leaders who understand that protecting criminals isn't compassion. It's betrayal of the citizens that they're supposed to serve. Let me know what you think about this. Drop it down in the comment section down below. Smash the like button if you kindly would. Share, subscribe, and as always, guys, I'll catch you on the next one.